The bride didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't make a scene. She simply disappeared. 10 minutes before the ceremony, while 400 distinguished guests admired towering arrangements of white peonies beneath crystal chandeliers, the bridal suite stood empty. Her veil rested neatly across the dressing table. Her diamond earrings lay beside it. The wedding bouquet had slipped gently onto the floor, as though someone had set it down halfway through a thought and never returned. Outside the suite, no one noticed. Not yet. The orchestra continued rehearsing. Photographers adjusted their lenses. Business leaders laughed politely over champagne. The hotel staff moved through the ballroom with practiced precision, carrying silver trays, fresh tea, and desserts that looked too beautiful to eat. Among them was Amara Okafor. She wasn't thinking about billionaires. She was thinking about tea. Specifically, whether the jasmine leaves had steeped 30 seconds too long. She lifted one porcelain pot, inhaled quietly, frowned almost imperceptibly, and exchanged it for another before any guest noticed. Her grandmother used to say, "Tea forgives impatience less than people do." Amara smiled to herself. Some lessons crossed oceans. She balanced her tray and continued through the ballroom. 2 years in Seoul had taught her many things. Enough Korean to laugh with elderly customers. Enough confidence to stop apologizing every time someone stared at her curly hair. Enough resilience to survive the teaching position that vanished before her second paycheck and the endless temporary jobs that followed. Today she wasn't a teacher. She wasn't an immigrant trying to figure life out. Today she was simply the woman serving tea. And somehow, she felt exactly where she belonged. Across the ballroom, an elderly woman watched her. Not the flowers. Not the arriving dignitaries. Not the cameras gathering outside. Just the young Nigerian woman carrying porcelain cups as though each one deserved its own careful journey. Chairwoman Kang Ji-hoon had spent 83 years learning how to read people. Most people looked upward, toward power, toward wealth, toward whoever could change their future. This young woman looked downward, toward an elderly guest whose walking cane had slipped beyond his reach. Without interrupting her work, Amara handed her tray to another server, bent gracefully, picked up the cane, and placed it back into the gentleman's waiting hand. She bowed politely, then continued walking. No hesitation, no performance, no glance around the room to see who had noticed. Chairwoman Kang noticed. She said nothing. A little girl suddenly burst into tears near the stage. One of the flower girls. Her tiny white shoe had come undone. Adults hurried past. Someone called for her mother. Before either arrived, Amara knelt beside the child. "It's all right," she whispered gently in Korean. "We'll fix it together." Small fingers trembled. Amara smiled. "May I?" The little girl nodded. Within moments, the ribbon was tied again. The tears stopped. The flower girl looked down at her shoe, then back up. "Pretty. The prettiest in Seoul," Amara replied. The child giggled. Chairwoman Kang watched every second. Still, she said nothing. If quiet acts of kindness are already touching your heart, take a moment to subscribe to the AfroK Tales. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the smallest moments change the biggest lives. And I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave your country in the comments below. The ballroom doors opened once more. Conversations softened. Heads turned. Kang Ji-hoon had arrived. Tall, calm, immaculately dressed in a tailored black tuxedo. He moved through the crowd with effortless grace, acknowledging greetings with courteous bows and measured smiles that never quite reached his eyes. Reporters loved him. Investors trusted him. His employees respected him. But anyone who truly knew him recognized one simple truth. He had perfected the art of looking present while being somewhere else entirely. His grandmother observed him from across the room. His posture was flawless. His expression unreadable. Only his eyes betrayed him. Not excitement, not joy, fatigue. A deep, quiet exhaustion. She had seen that look growing heavier over the past 5 years. It worried her more than any illness. Ji-hoon stopped beside her. "You look beautiful, Halmione." She patted his hand. "You look tired." The photographers disagree. They're paid to. For the briefest moment, the corner of his mouth lifted. Barely. Then it disappeared again. She squeezed his fingers. You still have time. His gaze drifted toward the bridal suite upstairs. I know. Neither of them explained what that meant. Neither needed to. Upstairs, the wedding planner knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. She tried the handle. Unlocked. The room stood perfectly still. Empty. Her clipboard slipped from her hands. The silence inside the suite suddenly felt much louder than the music below. She reached for her phone with shaking fingers. The wedding had just changed forever. First, nobody said the words out loud. Not because they didn't know them, because saying them would make them real. The wedding planner stood frozen in the bridal suite, her phone still pressed against her ear, while 3 assistants searched places no bride could possibly be. The dressing room, the powder room, the balcony, even the wardrobe large enough to hold 6 wedding gowns. Nothing, only silence, and a folded envelope resting neatly beneath the mirror. Downstairs, the orchestra continued playing. Guests continued smiling. Champagne continued flowing. For exactly 3 more minutes. Then the first security guard hurried across the ballroom. Another followed. Then 2 more. They weren't running. People in expensive suits never ran. But they moved with the particular urgency that only professionals recognize. The room felt different. Not louder. Quieter. Like the air itself had started listening. Amara noticed before anyone else did. Hospitality teaches you to read rooms. Not conversations. Rooms. She saw one event coordinator whisper to another. A photographer lower his camera. A maitre d' suddenly changed direction halfway across the ballroom. Something had happened. She kept pouring tea. Because whatever it was, her job hadn't changed. An elderly woman near the window struggled to lift her porcelain cup. Amara stepped forward immediately. Allow me. Thank you, dear. The woman smiled warmly. You have kind hands. Amara laughed softly. My grandmother used to say they were always too busy. And was she right? Usually. The older woman chuckled. Neither noticed Chairwoman Kang watching again. She wasn't watching Amara serve tea. She was watching what happened after. Amara stayed long enough to make sure the elderly guest's hands had stopped trembling before quietly moving away. No one had instructed her to do that. No one had praised her for it. She simply saw something that needed doing. Upstairs, the note was finally opened. The wedding planner's hands shook so badly she couldn't read it aloud. Chairwoman Kang took it instead. Her eyes moved steadily across the page. No panic. No visible emotion. When she finished, she folded the paper exactly as she had found it. Cancel the ceremony. The room stared at her. One executive spoke first. Madam, perhaps we should wait. She looked at him. For what? The bride may still. My grandson, she interrupted quietly, will not marry a woman who has already chosen another road. Silence. Absolute silence. One by one, phones came out. The calls began. The media had not yet learned the truth. But truth traveled faster than elevators. Ji-hoon stood alone inside a private waiting room. His tie remained perfectly straight. His jacket perfectly fitted. He had not yet been told. He already knew. There are moments when the body understands before words arrive. A knock. His chief of staff entered. No explanation was necessary. She left. Ji-hoon closed his eyes. Only for a second. When he opened them again, he surprised even himself. He wasn't angry. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't heartbroken. He simply exhaled. His shoulders lowered by the smallest fraction. Like a man who had been carrying a suitcase so long, he had forgotten how heavy it was until someone quietly took it away. His chief of staff noticed. He said nothing. Outside, guests began leaving in carefully controlled confusion. Someone blamed food poisoning. Someone whispered about family disagreements. Someone insisted the ceremony had merely been postponed. The truth fractured into 100 different rumors before it ever reached the parking lot. Inside the ballroom, Amara helped clear untouched tables. Wedding cakes looked strangely lonely when no one cut them. Flowers seemed almost embarrassed to still be blooming. She carried another tray toward the kitchen when she heard a quiet voice behind her. "My tea has gone cold." She turned. Chairwoman Kang, still seated. Everyone else seemed to be rushing somewhere. She wasn't. Amara smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry. You didn't pour it. I still should have noticed." The older woman's eyes lingered on her for a moment. "Would you make another pot?" "Of course. Not because I'm important." Amara blinked. "Because tea deserves a second chance." For the first time that afternoon, the chairwoman smiled. Very slightly. "You know tea. My grandmother would be offended if I didn't." "What did she teach you?" Amara thought for a second. "That you can learn almost everything about a person by how they wait." Chairwoman Kang tilted her head. "Explain." The impatient complain. The proud expect. The lonely apologize for taking your time. She gently replaced the cup. "But the kind people, they ask if you've eaten." For a long moment, neither woman spoke. The ballroom had become strangely empty. Workers folded chairs. Florists quietly removed arrangements meant for photographs that would never happen. And in the middle of all that disappointment, two women talked about tea. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like this video. It tells YouTube that stories built on heart, hope, and unforgettable characters deserve to reach more people. And tell me in the comments, what was the first moment that made you like Amara? Chairwoman Kang accepted the fresh cup with both hands. She didn't drink immediately. Instead, she asked, "Where are you from?" "Lagos." "You miss home?" "Every day." "Then why stay?" Amara looked toward the enormous windows overlooking Seoul. Rain had begun falling softly against the glass. "I came because I thought I knew what my life was supposed to become. And it became something else. Worse." She smiled. "Different." The chairwoman nodded slowly. "Different has saved more lives than perfect ever has." Amara laughed. "I'll remember that." "I hope you do." Across the ballroom, Ji-hoon emerged quietly from the private hallway. Most guests had already left. His wedding never happened. Yet somehow, he felt less trapped than he had an hour earlier. He walked without destination, past empty tables, past musicians packing their instruments, past photographers quietly deleting schedules from their phones. Then, he stopped. His grandmother was laughing. Not politely, not socially, actually laughing. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But he hadn't heard that sound in months. She sat beside a hotel waitress. The young woman was explaining something with animated hands, apparently about tea. His grandmother wiped the corner of one eye, still smiling. Ji-hoon stared. The cancelled wedding, the collapsing business arrangements, the embarrassment waiting outside, none of it had made his grandmother laugh today. A stranger carrying a teapot had. He found himself watching a little longer than he intended. Amara looked up just then. Their eyes met, only for a heartbeat. She offered the same courteous smile she had given every other guest that afternoon. Nothing more. Then she returned her attention to the elderly woman beside her. Ji-hoon continued walking, but something about that exchange stayed with him. Not because she had looked at him, because she hadn't. For perhaps the first time in years, someone had looked at Kang Ji-hoon and seen only another person. Not the heir, not the billionaire, not the groom everyone had been watching. Just a tired man walking through an empty ballroom. And somehow, that felt unexpectedly peaceful. The ballroom emptied the way rain leaves a street. Not all at once. Little by little, the musicians packed away their instruments. The florists carried out arrangements that had taken 3 days to build and would never appear in a wedding photograph. Hotel staff folded white tablecloths with the same care they had unfolded them that morning. By sunset, the room looked almost ordinary, as though it had never held 400 guests waiting for a marriage that never happened. Amara gathered the last porcelain teacups onto her tray. One was chipped. She turned it over in her hand. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for her. She set it aside. Some things could still be repaired. Others, you simply stopped pretending we're whole. You're still here. She turned. Her supervisor, Mrs. Han, stood beside the service station, rubbing tired eyes. I wanted to help finish. Mrs. Han looked around the ballroom. You've been on your feet since 5 this morning. So have you. The older woman laughed softly. That's different. How? I get paid to worry. Amara smiled. And I don't. Mrs. Han shook her head. No. You get paid to care. The words lingered longer than either expected. Outside, black luxury sedans lined the hotel's entrance. Executives disappeared into them one by one. Lawyers spoke quietly into phones. Reporters shouted questions no one answered. Flashes from cameras lit the evening like distant lightning. Every headline would say something different tomorrow. None would tell the real story. Inside a private conference room, the Kang family sat around a table large enough for 20. Only 8 chairs were occupied. Silence filled the others. Ji-hoon sat halfway down the table. His jacket was off. His tie loosened. Someone finally broke the silence. The media will speculate. Another voice answered. The shareholders will panic. The bride's family must issue a statement. We should announce the ceremony has merely been postponed. Chairwoman Kang listened, one by one, without interruption. When everyone had finished, she asked one question. Has anyone called the bride? The room became still. One executive cleared his throat. Madam. No. She repeated herself. Has anyone called her? Another silence. Finally, no. The chairwoman nodded once. I thought so. She folded her hands neatly on the table. You are all concerned with the company. She looked around the room. I am concerned with a young woman frightened enough to run away from her own wedding. No one spoke. She stood. The meeting was over. Not because answers had been found. Because priorities had. That evening, Amara finally left the hotel. The rain had stopped. Seoul shimmered beneath thousands of lights. She breathed deeply. Her feet hurt. Her shoulders ached. Her apartment was 40 minutes away by subway. She looked forward to instant noodles and absolute silence. She had almost reached the station when she heard someone calling. Miss! She turned. One of the hotel's younger servers came running toward her. Out of breath. They're looking for you. Amara frowned. I already clocked out. I know. The general manager asked if anyone had your number. Why? I don't know. You should go back. Amara looked toward the hotel. The building glowed against the evening sky. For reasons she couldn't explain, something inside her hesitated. Back inside, the lobby felt strangely quiet. The wedding decorations remained. But now they looked less like celebration, more like a memory someone had forgotten to remove. Mrs. Han met her halfway across the marble floor. There you are. Did I forget something? No. You've been requested. Requested. Mrs. Han lowered her voice. Personally. By whom? The chairwoman. Amara blinked. I'm sorry. The grandmother of the groom. I know who she is. No. Mrs. Han smiled nervously. I mean, she asked specifically for you. Amara laughed once. There must be some mistake. There isn't. A private tea room overlooked the hotel's traditional garden. The lights were low. Rainwater still clung to the maple leaves outside. Chairwoman Kang sat exactly where Amara remembered leaving her, as though she had never moved. A second cup rested opposite. Waiting. You came. You asked for me. I did. Amara bowed politely before sitting. Neither woman spoke immediately. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It simply seemed to belong there. Finally, the chairwoman poured tea herself. I owe you an apology. Amara looked surprised. For what? You spent today serving everyone else. I never asked who was serving you. Amara smiled gently. I've had worse days. I imagine you have. The older woman studied her carefully. Tell me about Lagos. The question caught Amara off guard. Most people asked why she came to Korea. Very few asked about what she had left behind. She found herself answering. The mornings were loud. Loud. My grandmother sang while she cooked. The neighbors argued over football. The market never really slept. The air always smelled like something frying. Chairwoman Kang listened without interrupting. And your parents? My father passed away when I was 12. Quiet pause. My mother still teaches. You miss her. Every day. The chairwoman nodded slowly. I understand missing someone. Her eyes drifted toward the garden. So much of growing older, she said quietly, is learning to carry empty chairs. Amara felt those words settle somewhere deep inside her. If you're still with us, thank you for spending your time with the AfroK Tales. Every great story is built one quiet moment at a time. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Chairwoman Kang sees something in Amara that everyone else has missed? The older woman reached into her handbag. Not for money, not for a business card, for a photograph. She placed it gently on the table. It showed a little boy, perhaps 6 years old. Bright eyes, wide smile, holding a fishing rod almost taller than himself. My grandson. Amara looked at the picture. The groom, the same boy. She looked again. The smile. It was impossible to connect this laughing child with the quiet man she had seen wandering through the ballroom. He smiled easily once, the chairwoman said. What happened? The older woman was silent for several moments. Life. Outside, a breeze stirred the wet leaves. Inside, neither woman rushed to fill the silence. Finally, the chairwoman asked, almost as if she were thinking out loud, do you know why I watched you today? Amara shook her head. I thought perhaps you were making sure I didn't spill the tea. The older woman laughed softly. No, I was watching to see what you did when you believed no one important was looking. Amara frowned. I'm just a hotel server. No, the chairwoman's voice remained gentle. You are a woman who notices people before they ask to be noticed. She folded her hands. My family has forgotten how to do that. Amara wasn't sure how to respond, so she didn't. Sometimes silence carried more respect than words. The chairwoman seemed to appreciate that. She lifted her cup, finished the last sip of tea, then asked a question that would quietly change both of their lives. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow evening? Not as staff, not as an employee, as my guest. Amara stared at her, certain she had misunderstood. The older woman smiled. I believe this conversation has only just begun. Amara didn't answer immediately, not because she was considering saying no, because she was trying to understand the question. Dinner, as her guest, not in uniform, not carrying a tray, not standing quietly against a wall while wealthy people discuss things that never seemed to include people like her. The chairwoman waited, patiently. People who had lived long enough understood something younger people often forgot. Silence wasn't empty. Sometimes, it was where courage gathered itself. Finally, Amara smiled. I don't actually know the proper etiquette for saying yes to someone like you. The older woman chuckled. You already have. I have. You answered honestly. Another pause. That's becoming very rare. Amara lowered her eyes, embarrassed. My grandmother would tell me not to overthink free food. That earned a genuine laugh. Not polite, not restrained, warm. It echoed softly through the little tea room before fading into the quiet again. I think, the chairwoman said, still smiling, I would have liked your grandmother. I think she would have liked you too. The words slipped out before Amara could stop them. Instead of taking offense, the older woman looked unexpectedly thoughtful. I haven't heard anyone say that to me in years. The subway ride home felt strangely unreal. Outside the window, Seoul blurred into ribbons of light. Office workers stared at their phones. Students leaned against the doors, half asleep. An elderly couple quietly shared roasted chestnuts wrapped in newspaper. Life continued, as though billion-dollar weddings hadn't fallen apart that afternoon. Amara rested her forehead lightly against the glass. Her phone buzzed. Mama. She smiled before answering. My daughter. Her mother's voice always sounded like home. You look tired. You can't even see me. A mother doesn't need to. Amara laughed. No, really. Long day. The longest. You finally worked one of those fancy weddings? I did. How was it? Amara looked around the crowded train. How exactly did one explain this? She laughed again. It didn't end with a wedding. Oh, the bride disappeared. Silence. Then, the bride did what? Amara covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. Exactly. Her mother sighed dramatically. I leave Nigeria for 1 week to attend a conference, and suddenly your life becomes a television drama. It does feel a little like one. You stayed out of trouble? I think so. You think? Amara hesitated. There was a grandmother. There was a pause on the other end. I'm listening. She invited me to dinner tomorrow. As staff. No. As me. Another silence. Longer this time. Then her mother asked softly, And what does your heart say? Amara looked through the train window again. I don't know. Then don't answer with fear. Those words settled somewhere deep. Her mother continued. Answer with wisdom. She reached her apartment just before 10. Small, warm, comfortably imperfect. The wallpaper near the kitchen peeled at one corner. One dining chair wobbled. The tiny balcony overlooked another apartment building rather than a beautiful river. She loved it anyway. She changed into an oversized sweatshirt, tied her hair into a loose bun, and finally made the instant noodles she had been thinking about all evening. Halfway through dinner, she noticed the folded napkin in her pocket. She unfolded it. A handwritten phone number. Nothing else. No title. No instructions. Only elegant handwriting. She smiled. The chairwoman had planned ahead. The following morning, the Kang estate woke before sunrise. Security gates opened. Gardeners trimmed hedges. Drivers lined polished cars along the front drive. Inside the breakfast room, nobody spoke. Ji-hoon sat across from his grandmother. Fresh newspapers lay folded beside his plate. Every front page carried some version of yesterday's disaster. Wedding cancelled. Bride missing. Historic union collapses. He ignored every headline. Instead, he watched his grandmother spread orange marmalade across toast with remarkable concentration. You seem cheerful. She didn't look up. I slept well. You haven't slept well in months. I know. He studied her. Should I be worried? Probably. Now she looked at him. I've invited someone to dinner tonight. A family friend? No. A business associate? No. Then who? The young woman serving tea yesterday. Ji-hoon blinked. For the first time in years, his grandmother had genuinely surprised him. The hotel server? Her name is Amara. You know her name? I asked. He set down his coffee. Why? The older woman spread another thin layer of marmalade. Because names matter. Halmiani. She finally met his eyes. When you were 7, you cried because a gardener left this estate after 30 years. He remembered. You told me. If no one remembers his name, it's like he never lived here. A gentle smile touched her lips. You've forgotten many things since then. She reached for her tea. But not everything. Later that afternoon, Ji-hoon found himself standing outside the estate's greenhouse. He wasn't entirely sure why. The gardeners had already finished watering. Sunlight filtered through the glass ceiling. His grandmother often came here when she wanted to think. Today, she wasn't alone. Mrs. Park, her longtime secretary, stood nearby reviewing the evening schedule. Dinner for 2, she confirmed. No, the chairwoman smiled to herself. Dinner for 3. Mrs. Park looked confused. Should I inform Mr. Kang? No, I'd rather surprise him. If the story is making you smile, tap the like button and subscribe to the AfroK Tales. Every subscription helps this channel bring you more original slow-burn romance stories filled with heart, family, and unforgettable characters. And tell me this in the comments. If you were Amara, would you accept dinner at the estate, or would you politely decline? At exactly 6:45 that evening, Amara stood outside the enormous iron gates of the Kang estate. She had changed her outfit 6 times. Eventually, she chose the simplest one, a navy blue dress, small pearl earrings her mother had given her before she left Lagos, comfortable shoes, her grandmother's silver bracelet. Nothing expensive, everything meaningful. She stared through the gates. Beyond them stretched a long tree-lined driveway disappearing toward a home she had only seen in magazines. A security guard approached. "Ms. Okafor?" "Yes." He smiled politely. "Chairwoman Kang has been expecting you." The gates opened. Slowly, silently, as Amara stepped inside, she had the unmistakable feeling that she wasn't simply entering an estate. She was walking toward a chapter of her life she had never imagined. Far above, from the second-floor study window, Ji-hoon happened to glance outside. He saw only a young woman walking steadily up the stone path. No hesitation, no attempt to look impressed. She paused briefly beside an old cherry tree, touched one of its leaves with quiet admiration, then continued toward the house. He found himself wondering, why would anyone stop to notice a tree when there was a mansion standing right in front of them? He kept watching until she disappeared through the front doors. Without realizing it, he smiled, just a little, not because she had arrived, but because, for reasons he couldn't yet explain, the house already felt a little less empty. The front doors opened before Amara had the chance to knock. An elderly housekeeper, dressed in a perfectly pressed charcoal hanbok, greeted her with a polite bow. "Ms. Okafor, good evening. We've been expecting you." Amara smiled. "I hope I'm not early." "You are precisely on time." The housekeeper stepped aside. "Chairwoman Kang appreciates people who respect time." Amara laughed softly. "My grandmother always said arriving late is another way of telling someone your time matters more than theirs." For the first time that evening, the housekeeper's expression softened. "I believe you and our chairwoman would have been friends even if you had met 50 years ago." The entrance hall was breathtaking. Not because it was extravagant, because it was lived in. The polished wooden floors reflected the warm glow of antique lamps. Paintings lined the walls. Not expensive modern pieces chosen by decorators, but family portraits that had clearly been loved for generations. A grandfather holding a fishing rod. A young girl chasing butterflies. A faded black and white photograph of a couple laughing at something outside the frame. The house didn't feel like a museum. Felt like memory. Amara found herself slowing down. People often rushed through beautiful places. She had never understood why. Mrs. Yoon noticed. "You like photographs. I like stories." The housekeeper glanced at her. "There's a difference? I think photographs only become beautiful after someone tells you the story behind them." Mrs. Yoon didn't answer, but she remembered the sentence. The dining room overlooked a moonlit garden. Only 3 places had been set. Not 30, not 12. 3. Chairwoman Kang was already seated. She stood the moment Amara entered. "You're here. I hope I didn't keep you waiting." "My dear," the older woman smiled. "I've reached an age where waiting for the right people no longer feels like waiting." Amara bowed. The chairwoman took both of her hands. "They're warm. I was nervous." "I know. You can tell. I've been meeting nervous people for 83 years. That earned another laugh. The room felt lighter. Footsteps echoed softly in the hallway. Ji-hoon entered. He stopped, just for a second. He had expected a formal dinner with his grandmother. Instead, he found the young woman from the hotel standing beside her. She wasn't wearing a uniform. Her navy dress was simple, elegant without trying. Her curly hair framed her face naturally. She looked comfortable, as though she hadn't dressed for the mansion. She had dressed to respect the invitation. His grandmother watched his expression with quiet amusement. "Ji-hoon." He recovered quickly. "Good evening." Amara bowed politely. "Good evening." For a heartbeat no one spoke. Then the chairwoman clapped her hands once. "Wonderful. You both look equally uncomfortable." Amara laughed before she could stop herself. Ji-hoon looked at his grandmother in disbelief. She looked entirely pleased with herself. Dinner began simply. No servants hovering every 30 seconds. No formal speeches. Only warm soup, steamed fish, seasonal vegetables, and conversation. Or rather, the chairwoman asked questions. Amara answered. Ji-hoon listened. So, the older woman asked, "What did you dream of becoming when you were 10? Amara smiled. "A pilot." Ji-hoon looked up. "A pilot? I thought clouds looked lonely. You wanted to visit them?" "I wanted to make sure they weren't." The chairwoman laughed so hard she had to put down her chopsticks. Ji-hoon blinked. His grandmother almost never laughed at dinner. He found himself smiling despite himself. Halfway through the meal, one of the younger maids entered carrying another teapot. Her hands shook. Just enough. Amara noticed immediately. The girl's sleeve caught the edge of the tablecloth. The porcelain teapot tilted. Hot tea splashed toward the chairwoman. Before anyone else reacted, Amara stood. She caught the handle with one hand and steadied the tray with the other. Not a single cup fell. Silence. The young maid's face drained of color. "I am so sorry." Her voice trembled. She looked ready to cry. Amara gently placed the teapot back onto the tray, then smiled. "It happens." The maid shook her head. "I could have burned the chairwoman." "You didn't." "I'm still sorry." Amara reached for a napkin and quietly dried the table. Then she leaned closer to the young woman. "So am I." The maid looked confused. "I should have noticed you were nervous." The girl stared. Nobody had ever apologized to her for her own mistake. Tears filled her eyes. "Thank you." She bowed repeatedly before leaving. The room grew quiet again. Ji-hoon looked at Amara. Not because she had prevented the accident. Because she had protected someone who had expected punishment. His grandmother noticed him watching. She said nothing. Later, dessert arrived. Fresh pears. Honey cakes. Tea. Always tea. The conversation drifted from food to travel, from Seoul to Lagos, from childhood memories to favorite books. It was easy. Unexpectedly easy. At one point, the chairwoman excused herself to take her evening medication. "I'll only be a moment." She disappeared through a side door, leaving Ji-hoon and Amara alone. The silence settled gently between them. Not awkward, simply unfamiliar. Finally, Ji-hoon spoke. "My grandmother likes you." Amara smiled into her teacup. "I noticed. She doesn't invite strangers here." "I noticed that too." He hesitated. "I should thank you." "For what?" "I haven't heard her laugh like this since." He stopped. She didn't finish the sentence for him. Sometimes people needed room to find difficult words. "Since before my grandfather passed." Amara lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "You didn't do anything extraordinary. I only had tea." He looked at her. "I think you've misunderstood." She looked back. It wasn't the tea. For a long moment, neither of them looked away. Then footsteps approached. The chairwoman returned. Whatever had begun in that brief silence quietly folded itself away. Not gone. Simply waiting. If you're enjoying Ji-hoon and Amara's slow burn connection, don't forget to subscribe to the AfroK Tales. The best love stories aren't rushed. They're built one quiet moment at a time. And tell me in the comments, what do you think Ji-hoon was about to say before his grandmother returned? As dinner drew to a close, Chairwoman Kang rose from her seat. "I have something to show you." She led them through a long corridor lined with family photographs. At the very end stood a wooden door unlike the others. She opened it. Inside was a small room. No expensive art. No antique furniture. Just shelves. Hundreds of books. A worn armchair beside a window. Kettle. 3 teacups. "My husband built this room." She smiled at the memory. "He said every family needs one place where titles are left outside." Amara slowly turned in a circle. "It feels peaceful." The chairwoman nodded. "Exactly." She reached for an old leather-bound book from the shelf. Then, without looking at either of them, she spoke quietly. "Sometimes, The life we spend years planning is only there to lead us toward the life we were actually meant to live. Neither Amara nor Ji-hoon answered. Outside the library window, the first cherry blossoms of spring drifted gently across the garden. And somewhere, unnoticed by all three of them, a pair of eyes watched from the darkness beyond the estate wall. The story of the runaway bride was far from over. The first sign that something had changed wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was breakfast. The following Saturday morning, Amara was halfway through washing dishes in her apartment when her phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number. She almost ignored it. Almost. Hello, Ms. Okafor. She recognized the voice immediately. Mrs. Yoon, the housekeeper. Good morning. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all. The chairwoman would like to know if you're free for lunch. Amara looked at the sink full of dishes. I wasn't expecting. I know. A pause. Neither was she. By noon, Amara was back at the estate. This time, the gates didn't feel quite so intimidating. The same guard smiled. Welcome back, Ms. Okafor. He remembered her name. She smiled back. Thank you. As she walked toward the main house, she noticed something she hadn't before. The gardeners weren't working in silence. They were laughing. One of them waved. She waved back. Felt strangely normal. Chairwoman Kang wasn't in the dining room. Mrs. Yoon led Amara through the garden instead. The estate stretched farther than she'd realized. Stone pathways curved between flowering shrubs. A koi pond reflected the afternoon sun. An old cherry tree stood alone near the river, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. Underneath it, the chairwoman sat with a chessboard. Across from her sat Ji-hoon. Neither looked particularly happy. Amara slowed. I can come back later. Both of them looked up. The chairwoman's entire face brightened. There you are. Ji-hoon stood politely. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. She glanced at the chessboard. Who's winning? My grandmother. The older woman corrected him. I'm surviving. Ji-hoon smiled. That's her version of winning. Amara laughed. Do you play? The chairwoman asked. A little. A dangerous answer. Ji-hoon looked amused. My grandmother believes everyone who says, a little, is secretly excellent. My grandmother believed anyone who bragged before playing had already lost. The chairwoman pointed to the empty chair. Sit. I'll watch. No. She smiled. You'll rescue my dignity. Ji-hoon leaned back. I've been trying to beat her for 20 years. And I've learned humility. The game lasted 43 minutes. Amara didn't rush. She studied each move carefully. Sometimes she smiled to herself before moving a piece. Sometimes she stared at the board for nearly a minute. No one hurried her. The garden remained wonderfully quiet. Birds moved through the trees. The river beyond the estate rolled lazily beneath the afternoon sun. Finally, the chairwoman tipped over her king. I surrender. Ji-hoon looked from the board to Amara. You beat her. The older woman laughed. I underestimated someone again. She looked at Amara. I dislike losing. I noticed. But she reached across the table and lightly touched Amara's hand. I enjoy discovering people even more. Lunch was simple. Bibimbap. Soup. Fresh fruit. No servants standing behind chairs. No formal dining rules. Halfway through the meal, Ji-hoon's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed. Business. I need to take this. The chairwoman nodded. He excused himself. Amara watched him disappear into the house. Only after he was gone did the older woman speak. Do you know what I see when I look at my grandson? Amara thought carefully. A man who carries too much. The chairwoman looked surprised. That quickly. My father carried the same look before he became sick. The older woman's eyes softened. Tell me. He always smiled. Amara stirred her tea slowly. But his smile arrived a second after everyone else's. The chairwoman looked toward the house. So does Ji-hoon's. He laughs. Amara continued gently. Only after checking whether everyone else is comfortable first. A long silence settled between them. Finally, the chairwoman whispered, "You noticed. I think lonely people recognize one another." That evening, after Amara had returned home, Ji-hoon walked into his grandmother's reading room. She was knitting, badly. She had been knitting the same scarf for almost 6 months. It remained remarkably short. "You invited her again." "I did." He sat opposite her. "You like her?" "I do." He watched her for a moment. "Why?" She continued knitting. "Because she makes this house behave differently." He frowned. "The house?" The staff laugh. The gardener's whistle. Mrs. Yoon has started humming. She finally looked up. "Even you smile before remembering you're supposed to be serious." Ji-hoon looked away. "I smiled." "You did." "I don't remember." "I know." The chairwoman smiled knowingly. That's how genuine smiles work. If Amara is becoming one of your favorite characters, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the AfroK Tales. Quiet strength often creates the biggest changes. And tell me in the comments, have you ever met someone whose kindness changed the atmosphere of an entire place? 3 days later, the first anonymous letter arrived. It wasn't addressed to the chairwoman or Ji-hoon. It was addressed to Amara. Mrs. Yoon found it resting neatly on the estate's front steps. No stamp, no return address, only her name. Inside, one sentence. "Some doors are beautiful because they stay closed." Amara read it twice, then folded it carefully. Mrs. Yoon noticed. "Are you frightened?" Amara considered the question. "A little." "Will you tell the chairwoman?" "I don't want to worry her." Mrs. Yoon held out her hand. "May I?" Amara gave her the letter. The older housekeeper read it. Her expression didn't change, but when she looked up, something in her eyes had. "Come with me." "Where?" "To Mr. Kang." Amara hesitated. "It may be nothing." Mrs. Yoon folded the paper once more. "In this family," she said quietly, "we no longer assume that." Together, they walked toward Ji-hoon's study. Neither of them noticed the groundskeeper across the lawn, watching, waiting, and quietly slipping his phone back into his pocket after sending a single message. She received the warning. Somewhere beyond the estate walls, someone smiled. The game had finally begun. Mrs. Yoon did not knock. She opened Ji-hoon's study door with the confidence of someone who had earned the right decades ago. Ji-hoon looked up immediately. His eyes moved from Mrs. Yoon to Amara to the folded letter in Mrs. Yoon's hand. "What happened?" Mrs. Yoon placed the note on his desk. He unfolded it. "Read it once, then read it again." His face became perfectly still. Not calm, still. The kind of stillness that came just before decisive action. "Where was this found?" "On the front steps. For Ms. Okafor." He looked at Amara. "You should have come to me immediately." She met his eyes. "I didn't want to cause trouble." His voice remained quiet. "You are not the trouble." The sentence hung in the room. He pressed a button beneath his desk. Within seconds, Mr. Han, the head of security, entered. "No one leaves the estate. Review every camera, every visitor, every delivery. And from this moment," he looked toward Amara, "Ms. Okafor is never alone." By evening, the atmosphere inside the estate had changed. Security doubled. The gates remained closed. Conversations became whispers. Even Min-jun noticed. During their English lesson, he stopped reading halfway through a sentence. "Is something wrong?" Amara smiled gently. "Sometimes adults become nervous." He studied her carefully. "Are you nervous?" She thought about lying. Instead, she chose the truth. "A little." He nodded, then quietly slipped his small hand into hers. "So am I." That night, Ji-hoon received a phone call. His expression darkened. "The bride. What about her?" "We found her." She hadn't disappeared because she feared marriage. She had run because, 2 days before the wedding, she overheard executives discussing a plan. Chairwoman Kang's signature was being forged. Control of Kang Holdings would quietly pass into the hands of a rival investment group. The marriage had been arranged to make the transition appear legitimate. When she confronted them, They threatened her family. So she ran. Not from Ji-hoon. From the conspiracy. An emergency family meeting was called the following morning. The bride returned. Pale. Exhausted. But determined. She placed a flash drive on the conference table. I recorded everything. The room fell silent. Executives who had served the Kang family for decades suddenly avoided eye contact. Names emerged. Bank transfers. Secret meetings. Forged documents. One name appeared again and again. Director Lee, the trusted financial advisor. A man who had attended family holidays. Who had carried Min-joon as a baby. Who had smiled at every celebration. Betrayal almost always wore a familiar face. While security moved to arrest those involved, Director Lee escaped. No one realized he was still inside the estate. Until Min-joon disappeared. The backpack was gone. His favorite book remained open on his bed. His room was empty. Amara's heart stopped. Min-joon. No answer. The entire estate erupted into motion. Security spread across the grounds. Ji-hoon's voice echoed through the corridors. Find him. Amara wasn't searching randomly. She remembered something Min-joon had once told her. When I'm scared, I hide where Mama planted flowers. She ran toward the old greenhouse near the river. The glass door stood slightly open. Inside, Director Lee held Min-joon by the shoulder. The little boy wasn't crying. He was staring straight ahead, trying to be brave. Stay back, Lee warned. No one needs to get hurt. Amara slowly stepped inside. He's only a child. He is leverage. No, she shook her head. He's someone's whole world. For the first time, Director Lee hesitated. That single hesitation was enough. Min-joon stomped hard on his foot. Lee cried out. The boy broke free. Amara ran, wrapped both arms around him, shielded him with her body. Seconds later, security flooded the greenhouse. Director Lee was arrested. The danger was over. Min-joon buried his face against Amara's shoulder. She held him tightly. I'm sorry. He shook his head. I knew you'd come. She closed her eyes. So did I. Part 8. Epilogue. Spring arrived quietly, as healing usually does. The estate no longer felt like a fortress. Felt like a home. The gardeners laughed again. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread. Mrs. Yoon admitted, very reluctantly, that Amara's jollof rice was surprisingly acceptable. Everyone celebrated that statement as though it were a standing ovation. Chairwoman Kang recovered her strength. One afternoon she invited Amara into the library, the same little room with 3 teacups. She poured tea herself. I owe you an apology. Amara looked surprised. For what? I told everyone I chose you because my grandson needed someone kind. She smiled. That wasn't the whole truth. Amara waited. The day of the wedding. I wasn't watching my grandson. I was watching you. The flower girl had begun crying. The guests ignored her. The photographers ignored her. My own family ignored her. You were carrying a tray. You could have kept walking. But you put the tray down. You knelt. You fixed the little girl's shoe. You wiped her tears. And you missed serving tea. The chairwoman laughed softly. Everyone thought the wedding had fallen apart because the bride disappeared. She looked warmly at Amara. I already knew something beautiful had arrived. Weeks later, the bride visited the estate one last time. She thanked Ji-hoon. I'm sorry. He smiled gently. You don't owe me an apology. You saved my grandmother. You saved my company. And he looked toward the garden. You made it possible for me to meet the right person. She followed his gaze. Amara was teaching Min-joon how to plant herbs. Both of them were covered in soil, both laughing. The bride smiled. I think your grandmother arranged the wrong wedding, so life could arrange the right one. Summer arrived. The cherry blossoms had long disappeared. In their place, green leaves, warm evenings, and laughter that drifted through open windows. One evening Ji-hoon found Amara beside the river with 2 cups of tea. You made one for me? I've learned someone usually appears when I make 2. He accepted the cup. They stood quietly, watching the Han River. "I've been thinking," he finally said. "Dangerous." "I know." He smiled. "The first time we met, you were serving tea, and I barely looked at you. You were busy. I was blind." She looked at him. "And now." He took a slow breath. "I don't walk into a room without looking for you first." Silence. Gentle. Warm. She looked down at her tea. "My grandmother always said, the best tea is never rushed." He smiled. "I've heard something similar. The best things simmer." She laughed. "They do." He reached for her hand. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just slowly enough that she had every chance to move away. She didn't. Their fingers met. Comfortably. Naturally. Like they had been finding their way there for a long time. A month later, there was another wedding. Not in a ballroom. Not in a luxury hotel. Not surrounded by politicians or cameras. Only family. Friends. Harabiaji from the neighborhood tea shop, who flew in from Busan with tears already in his eyes. Mrs. Yoon pretending she wasn't emotional. The gardeners. The kitchen staff. The little flower girl whose shoe Amara had tied months earlier. And Min Jun, standing proudly between them, holding both their hands. When the ceremony ended, Chairwoman Kang slowly stood. Everyone fell silent. She looked at her grandson, then at Amara. Her voice was gentle. "The wedding I planned never happened." A small pause. "But the family I prayed for," she smiled through tears, "finally did." That evening, after everyone had gone home, Min Jun taped a new drawing to the library wall. 3 figures, sitting around a table, steam rising from 3 cups of tea. Above them, in careful English that still wasn't perfect, he had written one word: home. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the AfroK Tales and turn on notifications. We tell stories where love is built through kindness, family is chosen by the heart, and every quiet moment matters. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what moved you the most? The little flower girl's shoe, Min Jun trusting Amara, or Chairwoman Kang's final words? Until the next story, remember, the strongest love rarely arrives with noise. It arrives quietly, asks for nothing, and changes everything.